Hello, welcome to our Unit 1 notes on the Jamestown Settlement. In our last section of notes, we talked a little bit about the motivations why the British would want to settle in America. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the first permanent settlement, specifically the Jamestown Settlement. So in 1607, England tries to create another settlement. Remember we talked about the Roanoke settlement, the one that vanished. We don't really know what happened to it. But Jamestown begins to become established in 1607. And here's a map that kind of shows you a little bit of where this is at. This is in the present-day state of Virginia. And I wanted to show you this map because it kind of shows you a little bit of like how far up the James River that they settled. They didn't settle right on the coast. And this was partially because they were worried about the Spanish attacking, and they wanted to kind of create an environment where they could kind of see the Spanish Navy if they did attack them. Unfortunately, there are going to be quite a few disadvantages to being located this far up the James River as well. So on this map, you can kind of see a little bit of where the settlements begin to happen. This is Jamestown, and then gradually it begins to grow from there. So here's a picture of the Jamestown Fort. So initially when they created the settlement, they established the fort and then kind of built out the settlement from there. And we'll do some activities where we'll talk a little bit more about the fort in particular. Jamestown is settled on a peninsula. We did mention that it's up the James River quite a bit. It's also in a very swampy location. So they didn't pick exactly the most healthy location. There's going to be a lot of like standing, stagnant water. It's going to create a lot of disease problems later on. But they did establish their colony there largely because they were worried about an attack from the Spanish. Now, the people that are investing in the Jamestown settlement are not doing this just because they want to be explorers or they want to, possibly reach some new area and discover some new area. They want to make money. This is an investment for them. And so when they send people over to America, their goal is to make a profit. And they believe they're going to do this by finding things like gold, silver, in some cases actually finding enough materials to make expensive perfumes. So when the settlers get there, their main objective, in their mind at least, is to find these things. Now, if you know much about the geography of Virginia, you're not going to find these things located naturally in that environment. You're not going to find gold, you're not going to find silver, those kinds of things. So initially, they're spending a lot of time looking for things that don't actually exist in Virginia. Now, if you've ever watched the show Survivor, or possibly Naked and Afraid, for example, you know that probably one of the first things you want to do when you get in an environment where you're new and it's a wilderness is you have to establish a food source, and you also have to establish a place to stay. You have to start to establish shelter. And they're not doing these things. They're spending most of their time looking for things like gold and riches and things that don't exist. Luck is also not on their side. So they happen to settle in Jamestown during the worst drought in over 700 years. We know this from some of the trees and some of the data and stuff that we're able to locate. So they're also, in addition to all the other stuff that's happening, it also happens to be an extreme drought. So the first year, they waste a lot of time looking for gold and riches, not building shelter, and also not storing up food that they're going to need for the winter time, which is going to be a huge issue. So the first winter at Jamestown is known as the starving time. The shelter is poor, weather conditions deteriorate, they don't have enough food, they haven't been able to trade for food with the Native Americans because they never really established a relationship with the local Native Americans. So the first winter is really tough. Now, out of the first 144 settlers that came to Jamestown, only 38 of those survived the first year. So, I mean, think about those odds. 38 out of 144 survive essentially the first year. So things are extremely tough and difficult in Jamestown. Also adding to the problems, a lot of the people that came to Jamestown, which initially were all men, lacked quite a bit of discipline and direction. A lot of these people were more kind of like upper class, wealthy, kind of English gentlemen. They didn't have a lot of specific skills that would have really helped them, like being a blacksmith or being a carpenter. So they also weren't really suited to probably finding a way to survive this environment. One person that does step up initially is John Smith. One of the things he does is he begins to establish rules. One of those rules, and probably the most important rule, is he states that if you don't work, then you're not going to eat. So if you're going to go out and look for gold or, basically do nothing, that's fine. That's your choice. But then you're also not going to benefit from all of the work that everybody else is doing to find food, to, create an environment in which they can live and shelter and those kinds of things. So John Smith really lays down the law. He also begins to map the area, and he begins to start trade with the local Powhatan tribe. So now they're able to trade for things like food. They're able to also trade for knowledge, knowing how to survive and knowing how to live off the land in this particular part of Virginia. John Rolfe, a couple years later, is also very important to the success of Jamestown because he begins to bring in a crop that's going to bring a profit. So the first couple of years, they're not really finding a way to actually make money, which is the desire of the investors. But John Rolfe begins to bring in a strain of tobacco that's going to be very desirable in England. There are some native types of tobacco in Virginia, but John Rolfe's thing is he brings in a strain of tobacco that's going to be a little bit sweeter and actually has more nicotine. So this is going to be a more valuable crop as far as what people back in England would like to buy. So John Rolfe introduces tobacco. They begin growing it in Jamestown, and this is finally what's going to help them make a profit. So again, it wasn't gold, it wasn't silver. It ends up being the crop of tobacco. By 1630, Jamestown is exporting 500,000 pounds of tobacco a year to England. So just kind of a sample of how, this really does impact the settlement. They have finally found the way to make money, and they start growing tobacco everywhere. They talk about even growing tobacco in the backyards of people's homes and in the streets of Jamestown. This is just kind of a quick illustration of what it might have looked like once they got the Jamestown settlement started. Again, they begin to have more and more people begin to come into Jamestown once they become profitable. They start having women come, families start to develop. So it really grows from kind of like a survival mode at the beginning to becoming more of like an actual settlement where people are living, people are able to raise crops for a living and sell it to England. Now, the other major contribution that John Rolfe has to Jamestown is that he marries Pocahontas. Pocahontas is the daughter of the local Powhatan chief. And so when John Rolfe, essentially one of the leaders of the English settlement, marries the daughter of Chief Powhatan, it creates an alliance between those two groups. So this helps out with trade. It starts to eliminate difficulties as far as the Native Americans attacking the English or the English attacking the Native Americans. So once they become married, this becomes a very close connection between the two groups. And it's almost like these two groups have now intertwined and are now more cooperating than being adversaries of each other. And we'll talk quite a bit about Pocahontas and some of our activities. Some of the things that Disney's done with the Pocahontas movies have completely distorted reality and what actually happened in Jamestown. So I will try and do my best to tell you about the real Pocahontas and some of the things we do in class, and not just the Disney-fied version of Pocahontas. So again, one of the things that's going to help with the alliance between this marriage is it's also going to help them trade with each other. So again, I want you to think about trade as objects, but also think of trade as information. These Powhatan Native Americans have lived in this area for years. They're going to be able to help them out and tell them about ways that they can then survive in Virginia. Some people want to come to Jamestown, but they don't have enough money to if they're in England. And so we also have a feature called indentured servants. And these are people that want to come but don't have the money to get there. So somebody in Jamestown, for example, might say, well, I'm going to pay your way over to Jamestown, but then I would like you to then work for me as maybe an apprentice in a blacksmith shop or, help me on my farm. And so this is not necessarily slavery. It's more like paying somebody back for paying them to come over to Jamestown. So this begins to happen a lot in Jamestown and some of the surrounding settlements. It is important to note that Virginia is what we call a royal colony. So this is a colony that's ruled by a governor that is appointed by the king. So there's still a very close connection to the king. The king also has complete say over what's happening in these colonies. And they create a representative government called the House of Burgesses. So we're going to talk a lot about how the government structure is kind of built here, but the House of Burgesses is the first representative government. So they can make some decisions in Virginia without having to go to the king and getting final approval. And this is the beginning of what we're going to see happen as a little bit more independent thinking as far as the settlers in terms of government and politics. So the growth of the English colonies begins from Jamestown and grows from there. Soon we have 13 colonies, and that's what we're going to talk about in our next section of notes, a little bit about the differences in these regions and different parts of the colonies. All right, there's your notes on Jamestown. Thanks, guys.